ensure the persons with the required knowledge and authority signs the project charter, distributes the signed project charter to appropriate project stakeholders. Okay, these are scenarios. Okay, so that ends this particular lesson, and we'll continue with the next one. Okay. This is our next slide. Okay, this is where we start our scope management plan, which is the first amongst our triple constraint. Okay. Okay. So in this lesson, we are creating stakeholders register, explain stakeholders analysis, describe project management plan process. Okay. Okay. So we explain the guidelines to develop project management plan, then describe scope management and plan scope management process, explain the guidelines to develop scope management plan. Okay. Now identify stakeholders. In the first place, who is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anyone who has business interests, who has an interest in the project, or anybody that the outcome of that project or the project itself affects either positively or negatively. That person is a stakeholder. Stakeholders are not only people that have a high stake in the company. No, it is anybody that the project affects, or the outcome of the project affects, or the person that has an interest, especially a business interest in that project. Now, let me cite an example. If maybe in a local community or in a village, a philanthropist wants to, give pipe-borne water to that community. Okay, let me assume that there's a stream nearby where the populace of that community goes to get water from. Now, it's possible that there are people that have been supplying them water from the stream. Maybe they bought a vehicle that they used to supply those water to the inhabitants of that village or that community. Now, when this philanthropy is coming to maybe build pipe-borne water infrastructure for the community, is a good thing. But the persons whom has been supplying that water automatically becomes a stakeholder to that project, because the outcome of that, his pipe-borne water project, will affect their business. So they automatically become stakeholders. So these stakeholders has to be identified on time, and you will find a way to manage them, either by absorbing them into the project or finding a way to help them out, because that water thing is their source of livelihood, and it's possible they have invested their money and their time in that water. So him coming now to bring up a pipe-borne water infrastructure in the community will affect them negatively, actually. So they must be managed. Okay, so that's a clear example. So stakeholders, in as much as those that have high stake in a company, becomes a stakeholder automatically in a project in that company. But other people like the staffs, the traders that business will affect, that project will affect, automatically becomes stakeholders to that project as well. Okay, so stakeholders should be identified early in the project so that their needs and expectation can be met. The project charter, the input of the identified stakeholder process include the project charter, procurement documents, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. Now, the tools and the tech include stakeholders analysis, expert judgment, meetings. The output include is stakeholder register. Okay, the tools and the tech for this particular process includes stakeholders analysis, expert judgment meetings. The output we have the stakeholders register. The identify project stakeholder continues. The input, like we said, we have project charter, provides information about the internal and external people and organization interest in the project. Procurement documents are utilized in bid and proposal activities, which include the buyer's invitation for bid, a invitation for negotiation, request for information, request for quotation, request for proposal, and seller's responses. These are procurement document, things you use in contractual relationship. Okay, now we have enterprise environmental factors, include culture and structure, organizational and industrial standards, global, regional, or local trends and practice or habits. Okay, then because these are ways you actually identify the stakeholders. For instance, in Nigeria, we have various religions. We have the Christian religion, you have the Muslim religion, you have the African traditional religion. Okay, these forms the structure and the culture of the people that you find around them. For instance, on Fridays in this part of the world, Muslims goes to pray, okay, at a particular time. So if those Muslims are in your project as your project team members, or they are part of a contractual relationship, maybe a third-party contractor, and so on and so forth, you must take that into consideration when you are scheduling the timing. Okay. Now, we in this part of the world, the Christians don't work on Sunday. Many of them don't. So when you are also scheduling your timing, you must take that into consideration. Okay, so we have organizational process assets, which includes stakeholders register template, lesson learned from previous project, and stakeholders register from previous project. Okay, now procurement documents. If a project has procurement activity which is intended for external goods or services and is based on established contract, the people in that contract are also project stakeholders. And this is a bidding procedure for a particular project, and is part of the project document. Okay, now stakeholder analysis. How do you know how to handle stakeholders when you see them, when you find them? Okay, we use what we call the power interest grid. Okay, the power interest grid helps you to know how to relate with stakeholders. Now, there are people that have high power or high stake in a project, maybe high power in an organization or high stake in the project. There are also people that have a high interest in the project. Now, with this chart we have here, you have the first one, chart A. You have people that have high power or stake in the project, but they have low interest in that project. So you keep them satisfied. That's how to manage them. Now, for chart B, these are people that have high power or high stakes and also high interest. Okay, you manage these people closely. Now, for people that have low power or low stakes and low interest, you just monitor them because their interest and their power can change. Okay, now for people that you have low power but high interest, you keep them informed. These are ways you manage your stakeholders. Okay, tools and techniques or steps to perform in stakeholder analysis. We have identify all potential stakeholders, analyze the support each stakeholder may provide and its impact on the project, determine how key stakeholders might react or respond in various situations, use known classification method to properly document stakeholders analysis. Example, what we used just now is power interest grid. There's also power influence grid, there's influence impact grid, and there's also salience method, a model. Okay. Now, stakeholder register contains specific information such as names, contact information, location, job roles or position, and project environment. Okay. Now, This is an example of a stakeholders register, and these are the content of each. So each of the stakeholders are registered here. Okay, these are their organizational position, their location, the role in project, the contact information, and so on and so forth. Okay, guideline to identify stakeholders. Review the project charter for the scope, boundaries, deliverables, outcome to get a sense of who may be affected. Okay, set up a meeting and use the stakeholders analysis technique to determine who has an interest in the project. Identify the stakeholders, the stakeholder and the support they might provide. Okay, use a classification model to organize your stakeholders and develop a stakeholder register to record all pertinent information for each stakeholders. Okay, now for this third point, identify the stakeholders and the support that they might provide. Some stakeholders may not actually be a part of the project, but because of the interest they have in that project, it may affect whether the project is successful or not. For instance, in an organization, let's say there's a project that has to do with developing a particular community. Some people may have negative interest. Some other persons may also have positive interest. In as much as it's a good thing to develop a community, maybe by putting road, but some people will tell you that, especially in this part of the world, that before you build a road crossing their community or so on and so forth, you will need to settle them first. Now, in doing that, you will not have to incur other costs to that particular project. Now, for some other persons, maybe people that already have businesses in that area, they will want the road to be done so that it will give their business a facelift. You understand? So they will try to do all possible best to help make sure that the project objective is realized. Okay. Now let's continue. Okay. This is a scenario. Okay. Then we have project management plan components. Okay. The project management plan is one or more documents that defines how project is executed, monitored, controlled, and closed. Okay, we have the baselines, things that make up the project management plan. You have baselines, you have subsidiary plans, you have life cycle. Okay, the project management plan components. We have plans that make up a project management plan. Look at this, we say plans. This means that there are other plans. Together, they make up the project management plan. We have the baseline, we have the subsidiary plans, we have life cycle, we have project processes, we have work explanations, you have change management plan, and so on and so forth. So for the baselines, examples are scope baselines, schedule baselines, and cost baselines. These are points in the project which you are not supposed to exceed, or what you are expected to accomplish in that project. Okay, what you are expected to accomplish. Okay? You are not expected to go beyond these baselines. Okay, now we have subsidiary plans. Examples are requirement management plan and communication management plan. There are other subsidiary plans which we'll get to in the course of this training. You have the life cycle. Okay, the plan may include a specific life cycle selected for the project and processes that will be applied to each phase of the project. Now, project processes, examples are descriptions of the tools and techniques to be used for accomplishing these processes and level of implementation for each selected process. Now, work explanations rather. It is an explanation for how work will be executed to meet the project objective. You have the change management plan. It will be included to provide procedures on how to control change requests, which may include configuration management. Okay. Develop a project management plan process. You have the first process, and okay, this is the first process in the planning process group. You have the input, you have the project charter, outcome from other projects, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. You have the tools and tech, like the facilitated expert judgment and facilitation techniques. Then you have the output of project management plans. Okay, and let me go further. Sorry. Okay. So you have tools and techniques. You have the expert judgment is used to customize the processes to meet specific project needs, develop technical and management details, determine the resources and skills needed for the project work, define the level of configuration management needed to apply to a project. When you talk about configuration, you're looking at structure, the structure management. Okay, now identify the project documents, prioritize the work to ensure resources are allocated to the appropriate work at the appropriate time. Now, facilitation techniques are used to resolve issues, brainstorm ideas, and enable problem solving and so on. We've talked about this before. Now, guideline, review the project charter for the high-level boundaries of the project, review the output from other processes such as baselines and subsidiary plans, review the enterprise environmental factors including government or industry standard, review organizational process assets including standardized guidelines, work instructions and proposal evaluation criteria, use tools and techniques such as expert judgment to tailor the process, use facilitation techniques such as brainstorming and conflict resolution to help determine and teams accomplish project activities and develop the project management plan and document the project management plan. Now, this is an example of a scope management plan. Okay. Now, the scope management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how the project scope will be identified, explained, monitored, and controlled. Now, there's something I tried to explain earlier. What makes up the scope of a project? The scope of a project is made up of one, the scope management plan. Number two, the WBS, which is work breakdown structure. Number three, the WBS dictionary. You put these three things together, you make up the scope of a project. Now, once the project has been scoped or baselined, you cannot add on that scope except it goes through a standard change management system. Okay, so these three things makes up the scope of a project. So we start with the scope management plan, the scope statement rather. So this is an example of the scope management plan, how it looks like. Okay, let me continue. Now the scope management plan components. The components are determined by the specifics of the project and can vary on a project by project basis. It includes a process for preparing a detailed project scope statement, okay, a documented process to use when creating the WBS of the project, a process for establishing how the WBS will be approved and maintained throughout the project lifecycle, a process to formalize the distribution and deliverables once a project is completed, a process to manage any change requests to the overall project scope. Now, the scope creep, a good scope management plan must prevent the project work from exceeding the identified work target. The tendency of a project work to exceed the expected limits stated in the project charter is called a scope creep. So when you are doing something that is not part of the scope, we refer to it as scope creep. Okay. A plan scope management process. The plan scope management process, we have the inputs, the tools and tech, and outputs. Okay, and these are the contents of each of them, and we'll get them as we go further. Okay, we have the project management plan, project charter, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. Now we have tools and tech like expert judgment, meetings. Then we have output, scope management plan, requirement management plan. Okay, requirement management plan. It is the component of the project management plan that describes how all projects will be determined, documented, updated.
Mr. give me the
Okay, requirement management plan. It is a component of the project management plan that describes how all project requirements will be determined, documented, updated, and managed. Components. How requirement activity will be planned, tracked, and reported. Configuration management activities such as how vision control of a project documents to the product will be initiated. Okay, requirement prioritization process, which defines how the project requirement will be analyzed and prioritized. Okay, now product matrix, which